You want to know a secret? Motivation is bull, and here's why.
Oh boy, we are actually doing this?
Yes. Yes, we are.
Okay.
Allow me to explain. I used to be fat. Like, fat. Like, I couldn't walk up the stairs without having a cardiac arrest fat. And as hard as I tried, I just couldn't get myself to do the things I knew I needed to do to lose the weight. And it's not because I wasn't motivated, because I was, except that my motivation tilted me towards the direction of chocolate and anime. Why? Well, because Reese's Pieces and Dragon Ball are way more enjoyable than burpees and squats. That being said, if you want to know how I finally managed to find my motivation and break the cycle of chub once and for all, stay tuned.
And welcome to Life with Thao, where we talk about relationships, personal growth, and all the things we wish we had known in our 20s. In this episode, we're going to break down what motivation is, why so many people struggle with it, and how you can build an unstoppable mindset. Let's get to it.
You know what's always amazed me about this lovely lady over here? She's an army of one. She knows how to get things done, and she gets them done fast. In the time that we've been together, she's built a successful production company, a thriving keto bakery, a massive TikTok following, and now she's on her way towards reaching 50,000 subs on her YouTube channel. Like, what the hell?
To be fair, yeah, I thrive on the process. I'm a fast learner, so whenever I get sucked into a new project, I usually start experiencing the rush of winning really fast. And the more I do it, the better I get, so the more I want to keep doing it. That feeling of reward becomes self sustaining despite the ups and downs. Lately, my TikTok hasn't been doing as well as it used to be, so it's a little bit discouraging.
Yeah, but I'd be drowning my sorrows in Nutella, or at least the old me would have. But she's built different. The feeling of accomplishment she gets from overcoming her obstacles generally overrides whatever discouragement or frustration or even anxiety she might feel. And that's honestly one of the things I most admire about her. She's just not ever going to stop until she figures it out.
Yeah, the rush I get from winning exceeds the negative feelings I may experience when things don't go my way. My brain automatically translates the frustration into a set of actionable steps, and I get to work. As long as I know what to do next, I have micro goals to pursue. And that's what makes the process enjoyable for me. I guess at the end of the day, I'm subconsciously seeking a reward. And that reward is knowing that I am a capable individual.
Me, on the other hand, I'm the opposite. And this applies to my fat loss journey just as much as it does anything else in my life. I'm a slow learner, so the process is never particularly fun or enjoyable, and it's only once I start getting a little bit good at something that I begin to enjoy it. And even then, my focus generally shifts from the progress that I'm making towards the progress that everybody else around me is making, and that usually makes me feel like I'm falling behind, and I eventually end up feeling discouraged anyway. So, if anybody tells you falling in love with the process is the way to go, that's stupid advice because for a lot of us, the process feels like death.
I think a lot of people would benefit from reframing the idea of motivation and what it actually is. Motivation isn't what drives our actions, it's what directs them. Here's what I mean: people are fundamentally driven by their temperament or their dominant emotional state. People like me, who are wired for ambition and curiosity, tend to chase new challenges because we get rewarded by the process itself. We try something new, we learn by doing, we get good at it, and we get a win. That's our loop. The process feels fun even when it gets frustrated.
Right. So her ambition gets her started. The motivation builds as she acquires a skill. Whereas in my case, I'm usually motivated by anxiety. I work hard not because I want to win, but because I don't want to get left behind. And while I do find my work fulfilling, it's the anxiety and not the achievement that drives me forward. My motivation isn't about chasing the win, it's about avoiding the loss.
And that's exactly why so many people struggle with the concept of motivation. Motivation isn't the starting point, it's the mechanism that reinforces our habits through emotional reward. Because most people are either chasing pleasure or soothing the pain.
Right. And that's the whole reason why it took me so long to even start my fitness journey. Growing up, exercise was always hard for me. I've had trash tier genetics for endurance and coordination and sports IQ since I was a kid. So when everybody else was having a grand old time playing football, I was always stressing out about missing a pass or failing a shot or losing the ball. Like, there was nothing about this that was fun for me, or in this context that we're talking about, there was no reward.
And as he got older, Dan's anxiety drove him to avoid physical activity because it protected him from the shame he associated with it. And his motivation kicked in to redirect his emotional state, which in this case meant reaching for the things that made him feel good: chocolate and anime. Those became his go to rewards every time he felt bad about himself.
Yeah, but the thing that they don't tell you is that, and this took me decades to understand, is that I was ingraining the very same habits that were destroying my health and wrecking what little self esteem I had left. So even when I did find the motivation or the drive to start eating better and working out, my reward system had already been hardwired to seek the comfort of junk food. And anytime life got difficult, the motivation to self soothe would kick in, and I'd fall back into my old habits.
See, again, my situation growing up was the opposite. I liked sports because I was good at them. I never really needed to fight the willpower because winning was fun. The competitive nature of it all gave me little goals to chase. And I'm not saying this to be dismissive, but to make a point. It's easy to blame inactivity on laziness or a lack of grit, but it's not always that simple. If someone has never felt the reward, the grind is so much harder. It almost feels like it's not even worth trying.
And the more I avoided sports, the worse I felt about myself. And the worse I felt, the more comfort I sought. Bad day? Milk and cookies. Exam pressure? Ben and Jerry's. Romantic rejection? Krispy Kreme. And so, as you would imagine, the weight piled on, as did the shame and then the depression. And before I knew it, I was drowning my sorrows in 40 ounces worth of milkshakes multiple times a week. For the non Americans out there, that's about 1.2 liters of milk, ice cream, and self loathing. Let me know in the comments if you can relate.
His motivation to seek comfort eventually spilled into every part of his life. It wasn't just about anxiety from sports anymore. These habits started showing up everywhere, and the more deeply he ingrained these habits, the worse it got. Did you ever want to just give it up?
That was my whole life. It got to a point where I'd completely lost hope that anything would ever get better in my life. And it wasn't simply acceptance, there was an element of surrender, like it wasn't even worth fighting for anymore. The way I saw it was that I wasn't starting from zero, I was starting from negative 1,000. And even thinking about the sheer amount of work that I'd have to do just to get back to a starting place, it made everything feel impossible.
That's rough. It's not easy fighting your nature, your instincts, and your habits. It's like you're going to war with the parts of yourself that just don't want to cooperate. And it's a war of attrition. But you did make the change. So if willpower and discipline aren't the starting points for growth, but the results of success, how do people even start their transformation?
I've thought about this a lot, and I genuinely think that people change for one of two reasons. Either they've got no choice, like they join the army and they get their ass kicked into shape, or they hit rock bottom.
This is part of the reason I hate motivational quotes. They never account for the reality people might be facing. They sound good, of course, but they don't give you any extra tools. They don't explain how to succeed when you're drowning in inertia.
I will say this though. We live in a time and a place where everything you need to change your life is out there and available. And it doesn't matter if you want to get in shape or start a business or learn how to cook. The knowledge is available and as close to free as it gets. But it's not information that changes people. I honestly believe that it's pain that forces people to action. And the same pain that once made me hide from the world eventually became so overwhelming that it forced me to take a good, long, hard look at myself. And I didn't like what I saw.
Alright, so here's the $1,000,000 question. How did you break the cycle? How did you go from automatically reaching for the cookie jar whenever you felt bad to meal prepping, calorie tracking, and exercising regularly?
Let me preface by saying that I don't think that you ever truly break old habits. You can replace them with better ones. And I could very easily regain the 70 pounds or 30 kilos that I lost because the bad habits are still here. I've just learned very slowly how to keep them under lock and key. But if you're asking when things began to change for me, I'd say in the moment I got tired of just feeling shitty about myself.
Okay, but what pushed you to replace your habits? To stop using food to soothe your pain and start doing the hard, boring, inconvenient things?
Honestly, years of hating the feeling of my gut spilling over my belt. Years of humiliation, years of rejection, years of watching my life pass me by while my friends were going on snowboarding trips that I was too ashamed to go on. Years of knocking on the door of diabetes. One day I just woke up and realized that if I kept doing what I was doing, I'd go from bad to worse to dead.
It never really occurred to me how difficult it could be for some people just to build the momentum to start. For me, there's no better time than now, has always been a given. But it wasn't until I met Dan that I realized starting now for some people means spending years unlearning bad behaviors before feeling the win.
All right, so bear with me because this story actually ties back to your question of how I managed to change my habits. When I was a kid, I was a huge Arnold Schwarzenegger fan. He was my hero. And fast forward 10 years later, and I was walking past the bookstore. I was probably 18 or 19 at the time. And I saw his Encyclopedia of Modern Bodybuilding in the window. And I don't know exactly why, but something kind of stirred inside of me and I decided to buy it. And no, this didn't awaken my inner Conan the Barbarian. I didn't wake up the next day with the urge to deadlift the planet. But there was something in those pages that struck a chord. And every night I'd pull the book out from under my bed just to flip through it. And I was amazed and inspired by the golden age bodybuilders and their physiques, but it wasn't just that. There was an undercurrent of admiration that I felt for them because of their focus, their discipline, their work ethic. And even though it was just a glimmer, I could begin to see what life would be like for me if I'd make a change, if I got my act together.
I think that finding role models is massive when it comes to finding the will to start. And we live in a time where finding one is both the easiest and the hardest thing in the world. On one hand, we've got thousands of inspirational people doing incredible things and sharing that knowledge for free, but at the same time, we are drowning in distractions. And in a world of infinite choices, picking one thing to focus on is actually a lot harder than it sounds.
I agree 100%. We didn't have social media back in those days. So, like I said, every night before going to bed, instead of doom scrolling, I'd read and reread the book. And I don't know why, of all things, this grabbed my attention, but it did. And instead of filling my head with the usual mind numbing crap that I'd always turn to, I was at least subconsciously learning the fundamentals of diet and exercise. And it would take years before I'd be able to commit to a real training plan, but the seeds were slowly being planted. And over the years, I tried and failed again and again to fix my diet and hit the gym because I'd fall back into my old habits, but at least I had the desire to change. I like to think that little by little, some of Arnold's work ethic was slowly starting to trickle inside of me.
I have a theory. I think that the more Dan dove into his readings and learned about training, the less anxious he became about the idea of getting in shape. Maybe he didn't know how to perform every exercise, but at least he had the starting point. At least the next time he would step into a gym, he would have a general idea of what to do. And beyond that, he had something to aspire to, something he felt could actually achieve.
That's exactly right. For the first time in my life, I was, again, probably subconsciously, building a picture in my mind of what a better life might actually look like, but more importantly, what it would feel like. And I truly believe that this is one of the missing keys for people who aren't naturally motivated to change. Step one is to get to the point where you're just sick and tired of the way things are. And that usually happens when you stop and really think about where your current choices are taking you. But step two is taking the time to visualize specifically and realistically what your life could look like if you adopted new habits and stuck with them long enough to see real change. Most people get stuck because they're reliving the same shitty 6 months over and over and over again. As the great Alex Hormozy says, shout out to Alex, you're the man.
What do you think would have been your worst case scenario if you had stayed on the road you were on?
I'll put it this way. By the time I was 18, I weighed in at 240 pounds, or about 110 kilograms. If I'd kept going, I could have easily hit 300 by my mid 20s. I was eating 5 to 8,000 calories a day, and not because I was hungry, but because I had completely given up on the idea that change was even possible. And I knew exactly where that path would lead: sleep apnea, diabetes, joint pain, a failing liver, heart disease, and the part that nobody wants to talk about, the stigma. Because when you're obese, people treat you differently. You get passed over for jobs, for opportunities, for relationships. And I know that my depression would have gotten worse. I just don't think I would have ever been able to live up to my potential.
To be honest with you guys, I feel like Dan and I have gotten closer since we started working on this episode. Because it's hard for people on the outside to understand what it really takes for people like him, stuck in a web of bad habits, to start their self betterment journey. For people like me, the reward comes quickly, so the motivation to keep going is almost instant and self perpetuating. But for him, the gratification is delayed. It's buried under layers of resistance. At the core, we're both reward seeking animals. We're just wired to chase different kinds of rewards.
But the hard truth for those of us that aren't naturally motivated is that nobody cares about our struggles. And understanding that really helped me get off of my ass. And at the end of the day, the choices were clear. I could keep eating myself into an early grave, or I could get my life together. So I decided to embrace the suck, and it was hard. Portion control was hard. Managing my cravings was hard. Even running half a mile was hard at the beginning. But I started with what I could do and built from there. I started by walking along the river for 30 minutes a day, 3 nights a week. I tried to cut down on the junk food, and even if I couldn't resist the urge of binge eating, 8 donuts instead of a dozen, that was already a win in my book.
How did that change things for you?
Everything sucked. I didn't know what I was doing, and the results came slowly, and I was giving up the only thing in my life that made it somewhat tolerable. But then one day, the scale began to move just a little bit. Then my belt started to feel a little looser, and then people started to notice. That's when things changed. When the reward wasn't food anymore, it was progress. And for the first time in my life, I'd experienced real success, and it felt good. A quick note on the dangers of success. My reward mechanisms were being reset. But being as obsessive as I am, I eventually dove so deep into the training rabbit hole that it started to mess with my health in a different way. Too much of a good thing eventually becomes bad, but that's a different story for a different day.
Yeah, there's something to be said for finding ways to make the process itself feel rewarding. It's not really about willpower or discipline. It's about experiencing a win. But if you can just get past the discomfort and hang on long enough to see the fruits of your labor, things get better.
As cliche as it sounds, everything does change. You start seeing the world differently, and the world starts treating you differently. But the biggest shift is that you start seeing yourself differently, as someone who deserves respect. Looking good is nice, but the real win is becoming the kind of person who just shows up every day to do the hard things. No bull, no excuses.
I think it's important to point out something. Making solid progress, whether it's health, fitness, or personal finances, isn't going to magically solve all your problems. It is naive to think that it will, but what it can do is trigger a chain reaction. Because once you start stacking wins in one area, you start to believe that change is possible in others too. And if you can just get past that initial hum, the part where everything feels pointless, where you don't see the results, that's when motivation finally kicks in.
At the end of the day, I didn't change because I had some massive epiphany. I changed because I got sick of watching my own life slip away. I didn't wake up one morning suddenly ready to grind. I just hit a point where I understood that staying the same felt worse than the effort it would take to make a change in my life.
So if you're stuck, here's the truth. Motivation isn't what gets you started. It's what builds after you start stacking wins.
And speaking of getting started, we're just getting warmed up. In part 2, we're breaking down the exact steps to pull yourself out of a slump, build momentum, and finally get moving towards your goals.
No fluff, no motivational bullshit. Just actionable strategies to actually make progress.
So if you're ready to stop spinning your wheels, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned.
And if you made it this far, drop a comment and let us know what small win are you working on this week. Because at the end of the day, it's not about massive overhauls. It's about starting where you are with what you have. See ya!